It's now time to bring you business. My name is Winston Taki, and now to Ofor's business story. Finance Minister Ken Ofori-Atta will later this week lead a high-powered delegation to China to advance government's course to get the Asian country to support Ghana's debt restructuring effort. China, which is an ad hoc participant in the G20 Creditor Committee, represents a third of the $5.7 billion loan that Ghana has accrued over the period, hence the need to engage as the country is seeking to secure a board-level approval from the IMF. Ken Ofori-Atta made a disclosure when a delegation from the German government paid a courtesy call on President Akufo-Addo at the Jubilee House on Monday.
Mr. President, we have, as you know, in December, we're able to secure the staff-level agreement in record time so that we set up the macro issues. And then the second part was working out a debt treatment, which, you know, last week we concluded with the domestic debt treatment and already began the discussions with the Paris Club, which is a very important part of ensuring that we get to the board by mid-March. The issue of the common framework has been problematic for Africa, Zambia, Ethiopia, Chad, and therefore in going into that, we're very categorical that it has to be fast-tracked, and therefore they have to set up their creditor committee very quickly. They've acceded to that, and we hope that that would happen quickly. The big elephant in the room, of course, is China, as to how China will comport themselves in that for comparability of treatment, because China wants to do a bilateral. We will be visiting China at the end of the week to really discuss how they come into the envelope as quickly as possible. The German Minister of Finance was clear that he will put his weight behind ensuring that everybody is in the common framework so that we move quickly. So we are looking for that support from them. China represents about a third of the loan, the 5.7 billion loan to the bilaterals. And so it's important that we engage them strongly, especially before the G20 meetings in Bangalore. So that's going well. We completed the domestic debt exchange program, which is important for the board, and started discussions with the external bond holders. Then NDA is being worked on. So, Mr. President, you chair the CVF, and then we chair the V20. During the spring meetings, had the opportunity to meet with the federal minister on the issue of V20.
Now let's bring you an update on how the external debt structure of Ghana looks like. Ghana has applied for debt restructuring through the G20 Common Framework and has asked for the process to be expedited. Under the Common Framework, private and bilateral creditors take part in the debt restructuring, but multilateral creditors do not. The average interest rate on Ghana's debt owed to private lenders is 7.5%, while on bilateral debt it is 1.8%, and multilateral's debt is owed at 0.8%. Of Ghana's scheduled foreign currency external debt service, as you can see on your screen currently, that is being owed between 2023 and 2029, 64% is to private lenders, while 20% is to multilateral institutions. 10% is to China, which currently the finance minister is in talks to have whether debt cancellation or restructuring with the global multi-power. 6% is to other governments. This heavy indebtedness on the private creditor side is a continued warning to other African countries courting the Eurobonds and commercial debt route of financing development without appropriate legal policy and frameworks which will safeguard countries in difficult times. As it stands now, the key challenge in handling Ghana's debt restructuring is to get the private lenders to agree to a significant debt cancellation. Now, let's speak to, we are joined on Zoom by the Executive Director of the Africa-China Center for Policy and Advisory, Paul Frimpong, to give us more insight on the development of relations with Africa and China. Good afternoon and welcome to Newsbeat.
Good afternoon, Winston, and thank you for having me.
The Finance Minister, Ken Ofori-Atta, is currently in China on an external debt restructuring talks. Currently, China holds about 10% of Ghana's total debt. Do you foresee an instance of debt cancellation in this case?
Yes, thank you very much. I think the first point, of course, the key player here is China. And of course, in order to make any form of projection as to whether we can reach a debt cancellation or restructuring, it has to be about trying to understand and have a feel of who China is, what China has been all these years to Ghana and to multiple countries across the continent, what has been China's attitude towards, these debt-related conversations that are happening. I must be quick to say that if you look at the track record of China in handling and dealing with the debt situation as has come to be known, it has been a very responsible partner to so many countries across the continent, not just Ghana. And when we say somebody is a responsible partner in terms of investment, you can trace it back to how this whole debt and an investment came about. Of course, it was at a point that countries like Ghana, we needed critical infrastructure. So if you track all the investment, if you look at the debt situation with China, as you mentioned, 10% with China, most of the money has gone into critical, tangible investment. So you'll be in a situation where a country like Ghana will need a critical investment into infrastructure. Our original partner did not see that as a necessary, so we're just being banded around on aid and all of that. But China came in and gave funding for these kind of critical infrastructure. Now, that is a typical case of someone who is a very responsible investor. Secondly, you look at recently, China has already done so with about 12 countries on the continent, just latter part of last year, where China gave debt relief to about 12 or so countries across the continent worth billions of dollars, and even further gave them the chance to draw on their special drawing right with the IMF, the International Monetary Fund. So that is another angle that you can see that this is a responsible partner. The third reason to show that China is a responsible partner in this case can help us to actually anticipate that something positive can come out of this visit is that if you look at even China's commitment to Africa during the last FOCAC, which is the Forum on China-Africa Cooperation, where we see multiple, all kinds of presidents across the continent dealing with China. China made a commitment which is typically lower.
Okay, Mr. Frimpong, let me get you on this. Some research has shown that most African countries like Ghana are currently in deep debt default due to the high interest rate charged by these multilaterals or developed nations. Do you have that same insight?
Yeah, so even that narrative, I'm a bit cautious on how to base our analysis on this narrative. Now, here's some facts, right? So there's a research firm called Development Reimagined who did a very thorough research on the debt structure of Africa, in terms of these debt crises that we've seen. It did that across the world. And it found out that 79 countries across the world are at the level of debt unsustainability. So it means that these countries have debt to GDP about 60%, 79 countries the whole world. Out of these 79, 25 of them are African, right? So 25 out of the 79 countries with debt unsustainability are in Africa. And guess what? Out of these 25, 23, out of these 79, 23 are classified as high-risk countries. And all these 23 are African countries. So we have to be very careful on that narrative. Yes, there's some issue about liquidity issues, as you've seen in Zambia, in Chad, in Angola, in Ethiopia, and of course, in the case of Ghana. Okay. But we can trace it back to so many of these instances because at the level that countries were looking for infrastructure financing, China came to play. And so that is what I see, that we have to be careful about the narrative. Yes, we have challenges.
Before I let you go, I want to get your take on the recent U.S. interest in Africa in terms of, and also China. Now we see a lot of debate about who is in charge of the financial market globally. China is playing a key role, the U.S. is playing a key role. Now Ghana seems to be the voice of the continent's push for aid. What do you make of that, finally?
Yeah, I think it's a question of who has the best interest, everybody's protecting their interest. Of course, China is in Africa, first for China's interest. U.S. have now revived its interest by hosting the second U.S. African Leaders Summit, as you mentioned earlier. But for me, I think we as a continent are in a very good position, has always been, to make sure that we position ourselves to deal with these all these partners in a level that we think is the interest of Africa. For example, if you can trace back the rhetoric of many countries across the continent, of course, from their leaders, we've made clear statement that we are down with aid, we are here for business. Even at the African-US Leaders Summit, even our president, our own president, President Akufo-Addo, spoke and mentioned the fact that we are ready for business, we are here for investment, we've gone past the era of aid, and all of that. We want to do real business. And guess what? Who has been doing that with China, with Africa for all these recent decades? It's China. So for me, it's a welcome development. I don't see the reason why we should be worried about the fact that US have renewed interest in the continent. But it has to understand that Africa is not at the same level we used to be during colonial era and post-colonial era. Now have the chance to partner with other interested parties, be it Turkey, India.
Okay. All right, Paul, we are grateful for your time. Thank you for your insight. Paul Frimpong is Executive Director for the Africa-China Center for Policy and Advisory, giving us insight on relation to China. Let me also correct that the Finance Minister is yet to get to China to have the conversation in terms of the debt restructuring. My name is Winston Taki. We have sports news for you.